everybody, this is a Southern Hellenist and I'm back with another video. So last week I started doing streaming and I had decided the last moment, I did mention this in the streaming, that I was going to be talking about the famous, like the most notable people who practice magic in ancient Greece, but I decided to go ahead and use that to talk about because the next day was the anniversary of the death of Hypatia. I know I'm probably mispronouncing her name. I had trouble pronouncing it at the stream, and yeah, so it was pretty evident that there are still a lot of Greek names that I do have a problem pronouncing. So, but I am going to talk about that this week, but today I'm going to be talking about death burials in ancient Greece, and why this particular practice was targeted by the church. Now there was many Greek practices that was targeted by the church that had been around for thousands of years. And the reason that they were mainly targeted by the church is because they were around for thousands of years. Also, when you're trying to change society and change every aspect or control every aspect of a person's life, the most solemn and most important ritual that you really do want to control is death, is how the dead are buried, how they're remembered, and most importantly, what rituals are done. And how this was one of the big rituals that was really they found ways around it, and they had to modify their practices in order to be able to still do the spirit of that particular ritual, so that the church would not totally have control over this person's death. So when we look at death practices today, not every culture does it the same. There are Muslims that bury the body as soon as possible. They bury the shroud. This is also known nowadays as a green burial because there is no chemicals that are used. Then there's your typical embalming, which, I didn't do, which encompasses, which has a lot of like religious connotations, and this is actually the end result of a long time of replacing practices and reinventing them and doing new things. Then there are what's known as sky burials, where this is typically done in Buddhism. Especially over there in Asia, you have a body that has died. They do their little whatever they do, because I'm not an expert on Buddhist rituals, so I'll just say whatever they do. And they go out there and they put the body there on the mountain, and vultures eat the carcass, and that's how it happens. Then you had the ancient heathens who did cremation, and buried the warrior with his longboat. There are ancient Egyptian practices that involved the mummification of the body and, of course, animals. And, of course, there is the Greeks and the Romans. Now, I don't know about Native Americans, so I'm not going to say what they do because I don't know. So here's the Greek and the Romans and their burial customs. Now, the Greeks, I actually have Walter Burkirk's Greek Religion on Scribd. It's a PDF file, but cremation was done during that time. Now, this was a practice that was heavily condemned by the church. The church did not believe in cremation. They believed that your body had to be whole in order to be raptured when Christ came back. This was one of the things my mother mentioned when she was alive, that she did not want to be cremated because she wanted to be whole to be raptured. So this goes all the way back to that particular thing. However, because intact burials are extremely expensive, it's a disrespect to your family by saying, I don't care that you don't have the money, this is what I want. This is why life insurance policies are so important, because it allows the family members to do exactly what the deceased would want. When you don't have one, you have to do what you have to do. So, why was the church so against cremation? Because it was pagan. So in other words, anyone who gets cremated, they are actually taking part in a pagan ritual, because that's what the heathens did, that's what the Hellenists did. I'm pretty sure that is what the Romans did. The Romans adopted a lot of practices from the Greeks. They also made their gods look more like the Greeks, except with like Roman attire on and stuff. Oh, I forgot to mention, the Celts used to actually just let the body decompose, and then they would take the bones, clean them, and would put them in caves or like burial areas, and the people would go there and worship their ancestors. So different cultures did different things. So there actually was a episode called Clash of the Gods, and I do believe I mentioned this in a video where I made a mention that they did not talk about the forced Christianization of the Greeks and the Romans and all that type of stuff, but they did talk about about the Norse, about how they were basically told they couldn't do this anymore and how they really hated it. Yeah, so. Okay, so one of the scenes that was in the episode was a Greek burial. This is before cremation takes place. There are candles. There are weeping. Weeping family members. It's a very, very sad time. And what ended up happening was they would go and they would put 2 coins over the eyes of the deceased, and that enabled the deceased spirit to pay Charon to cross the river Styx into the underworld. This was another thing that was condemned by the church. The church did not want these coins that okay, so I'll explain everything. They put gold coins over the person's eyes, and in fact, when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, he died. One of his men actually put 2 coins over his eyes so that Abraham Lincoln could pay Charon the fee to get across the river Styx. So why in the world was this particular practice of putting gold coins over the eyes of the deceased condemned by the church? Simple. That was money they were not getting. So what ended up happening was when the church outlawed cremation, and also outlawed the laying of the coins on the eyes. What the deceased family members did was they actually put the coins in the body. So basically, they would put the coins in the body, and they would massage the muscles to force the muscles to constrict and to force this into the stomach cavity. Because the person was deceased, the coins would not get digested by the stomach acid. So if you look at if you're an archaeologist and you're looking at a skeleton of a deceased and you see coins where the stomach used to be, then you know that death took place during the time that the church was condemning this particular practice. And once it was in the stomach, it was out of reach of the church. The church, first of all, did not know this was going on, and I don't know if they cut open the stomach to see if there was coins in it or not. But definitely, that's going to be something I'll talk about in the stream. And if anybody out there knows if the church actually cut open the body to see if there was coins in the stomach, that'd be interesting to talk about. So after these rituals were done, the body was in fact cremated. Now, the reason for the coins, I mentioned that they would put the coins on the eyes so the deceased would have the coinage to pay Charon to get across the river Styx. The belief was, if this was not done, the spirit of the deceased would remain on the side of the living and would become what is known as ghosts, or like vengeful spirits. and this is not something you wanted. And they also believe was that vengeful spirits that did not get this would actually come back and haunt their loved ones. So people were very, very worried about ghosts. They do in fact exist, despite beliefs. I have actually seen one. My mother had experiences growing up with ghosts and stuff. That's how come she believes in them. It says here, because this is actually it's a PDF, so it's like really tiny. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so the difference between the Greeks and the Mycenaeans is the Greeks started doing what is known as single burials. I did read somewhere that the Romans used to put the deceased into like walls or something like that. Let's see here. So the strict separation of settlements and grave precincts goes together with the development of city life. The dead must be carried out, hence graves accumulated along the main routes out of the city. So, alright, so for instance, if you go and look at, I'm going to mention the Bible in this one, I was saying that Jesus was buried outside of the city, which means he was buried in the grave precinct. So, there has been little boxes found during the time that Jerusalem was a Roman province. And there's these little bitty boxes, not little bitty boxes, but they're like pretty decent sized boxes that inside of it contains bones. Now, what that tells you about their burial practice is that they put the body in a location, let the body decompose, let it turn into a skeleton, and then they would wash the bones and they would put the bones in a box and put it in the wall, which is pretty interesting. So when we talk about like the grave precincts, we talk about areas that were off limits, areas that were considered, in my own words, cities of the dead. And like in Egypt, they have known as the City of the Dead, and the homeless live there among the crypts and all that stuff. I guess when you're homeless, you really can't be picky about where you live. So these were areas that were separated from the living. Now, I have no idea what happened to the grave precincts after the Christianization of Greece. But when it was a polytheistic country, they had clear markers. All right. Funerals for infants and are always an exception. The essential stations in the normal funerary ritual are thus the laying out of the corpse, the carrying out, and the funeral proper with funerary sacrifices and funerary banquet, which are taken up as a basis of continuing grave cult. So, for instance, so that goes along with like the Egyptians. They would have, they would do rituals connected with gods that were connected with the dead. And they definitely had a banquet. So, for instance, when King Tutankhamun died, there, of course, was rituals and stuff like that. But it's interesting is so if we go and look at that, we're thinking of the two main deities, or no, three main deities that probably would have been done sacrifices to. Hermes, as in his Catholic form, might be Zeus in his Catholic form, don't know. But definitely Hades and Persephone would also get sacrifices. So, like last week was the was the spring equinox, and we celebrated her coming back as Kor. But when she's in the underworld, she is Persephone. She is queen of the underworld, queen of the dead. And so that would also be, she would also, it's not too far to believe that she would also be given sacrifices too. So she got plenty of sacrifices as queen of the underworld because of her connection with the dead VI, that she's married to Hades. I don't know if Charon got sacrifices or if Thanos got sacrifices, but definitely you have like Hermes and Hades, and definitely Persephone. Okay. Alright, so apparently it was, apparently this was done by women, which is interesting. The lament, which is the duty of the women to perform, is indispensable. So, like, for instance, the video that I watched talking about Hades, the scene had nothing but women, which goes along with what Walter Burkirk says in his book. Sparta had a messenger, a subject messenger, to share in the mourning at the death of a king. Yeah. So that was like I said, there was a lot of things the church did. They eliminated the grave cults. They eliminated the coins on the eyes, and of course people would find a way around it, and they would actually, as I said, would force the corpse to swallow the coins. You had the lament, you had, like I said, in Sparta, you had the messenger who had to take part. You had sacrifices. I have no idea what was sacrificed to Hades or to Hermes or to Persephone, but it probably was an animal that was sacred to them, so it was sacrificed. Like, for instance, if you're dealing with Hecate, you would like sacrifice black puppies. They had to be entirely black with not a single spot of white. Kind of makes you wonder, like, you know, did the homeowners like hide the dogs? I don't know. But yeah, so once these practices were outlawed, the church had to immediately come up with a new ritual to replace the old, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of people in Greece did not like the new ritual, but given time they got used to it and accepted it. Not that they really liked it, but you know. I find it really hard to believe, like, you look at modern day Greece and you see all these houses and you don't see a grave precinct. And my theory is, and I really want to share that theory with people, is I think that all those graves were dug up and they were destroyed, and then houses were built on top. I don't know why the heck you would want to live in a former graveyard, but each to their own, I guess. So yeah, so what did I do as my funeral custom? Well, I just went to work. But I do plan to have have some kind of dinner to celebrate and to remember her and all that type of stuff. So I'll see you guys around. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and until then, be blessed.